Hello, this is Del Blue, and I'm going to demonstrate how to paint a beach scene. In this case, with oil paint. I have primed my canvas already so that I don't have to worry about covering up white canvas, and that's entirely up to the individual, but this works best for me. I have put the masking tape on just to establish a horizon line, and that way I don't have to keep working with it. And it may change to some degree as I paint along, but what I'm going to do in this session is paint the sky. So I have used cobalt blue in a mixture with white and just a touch of burnt sienna. That keeps the blue from being too blue, and it grays it down slightly, but that's sort of personal opinion. That works best for me. And I'm using liquid as my medium. And you'll notice that my base coat is very similar. Now, the one thing I always say about painting skies and clouds is that we all know that the sky is blue, but it's various shades of blue at various times and with different positions of the sun. So that too is a matter of opinion. So however you want your sky to look, just go with it. Now, what I do when I'm applying paint, and as you can tell, we have a little thunderstorm brewing here, but I love the sound of the rain. I have my sliding door open so that I can enjoy it, but if I had too many more claps of thunder, I might have to change my mind. Okay, and as I go along, even though I have my paint pre-mixed to some extent, I can go in and add different colors. I'm not too happy with what happened there. Now, one thing that happens when you add these different colors into your sky as you go along is that you inadvertently set up some places to place your clouds. So I'm just going to randomly add this color. And the nice thing about oil paint is that I can change my mind. Also, be careful how you apply the paint with your brush, because although there are streaks of clouds, certainly you want to kind of pay attention to the shapes of your brush strokes. And as you know, if you've ever watched a sunset, and I'm sure most of you have, you also realize that the colors of the sky change dramatically with sunrise and sunset. I'm going to gray these darker areas somewhat. With just a touch of orange. Orange is the complement to blue. So anytime you need to gray down a color to keep it from jumping off the canvas, you just add a little bit of the complement. I'm going to sort of consider where my clouds are going. And these little areas will be the bottoms of my clouds. But I can change my mind as I go along. And I can also add more color as I decide where I want my clouds to go. And I don't suppose there's any two clouds that are alike. This is going to be a somewhat cloudy day. I really don't like having to deal with shadows much in beach scenes because I have all those shadows from sea oats I have to deal with if I have too much sun. Okay, I think I'm ready to start with some clouds. Now, what I will do is clean my brush out. And I always keep a paper towel in my hand to get out the excess. So I'm going to take a little bit of white and a touch of liquid. I don't want to get it too transparent. But I'm going to go with the suggestion here that this cloud is going to begin up here. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that clouds have various places where they're highlighted. And I sort of like what's happening there, so I'm going to leave that. I might come in and fade that out a little bit. Maybe you've always been a cloud watcher. I think clouds are beautiful, so I have watched many of them, but I've watched them more since I've been painting. Now, basically, you want to fade those out so that they're a little darker as they go along. But again, clouds are all different. I'm going to start down here with another little patch of clouds. Now, some people like highly textured paintings, and that would include clouds, but I like them to be a little bit smoother. And because this is oil paint, I can change my mind as I go along. Okay, I'm cleaning out my brush to get some white paint without any liquid because it's already pretty moist. And I'm laying in some texture here, some places where the light might be hitting the top of the cloud. And be careful to change your brush position as you apply, and by all means learn how much touch is acceptable, because you don't want to keep pressing on this, especially in the top area, because you will end up losing. I'm wiping my brush out again, and I'm going back into certain areas. And if you'll notice, this is kind of a delicate touch. I'm not sure you can see this. But some clouds have some round shapes in them. Others have some straight. So I'm going to do a few different ones. I may have to come back as this starts to dry and do some more. I like the little flecks here. But because I have so much medium, I can't make that happen too thick. Now I'm going to reach over and get just a little bit of alizarin crimson to make this a little more gray. To suggest that these clouds are heavy and full of rain, perhaps, or getting full of rain. So my real storm outside is encouraging that kind of thought. I've painted numerous clouds in my day. At one point in time, I painted 2,000 square feet of clouds in a church sanctuary. And that was quite an undertaking. It's a little bit too purple there. In most cases, if you want something to show up, you need to create some contrast, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Is create some contrast. And I can't stress how important it is to learn not to overwork your painting with your brush. Beginning painters, and I must admit I did this for a long time because I didn't want to waste a bit of paint. But I found out after so long a time that if you keep working with the paint that's in your brush, it's easy to overwork it. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied for the moment with that. Some of these previous brush strokes kind of automatically suggest a place that I could put some highlights. If you've watched other artists paint clouds, you probably know that some of them start with the shadows and then move up to the highlights. Others begin with the highlights and work down to the shadows. And I actually think I do a combination of both. Sort of depends on what it looks like when I'm finished putting down my base coat. I realize there's a glare from my light that may be hindering the view. So let me turn one light off. Still have some glare. Let me prop that up in my masking tape. Now these clouds are going to show up much better when you put them up against the darker values. And you can always go back in and add those shadows. And actually create some dark areas. By using the initial mixture of cobalt blue and burnt sienna. This area right over here where I put the alizarin crimson, still a little bit too bright to suit me. It doesn't mean it couldn't be that bright. I've seen many sunsets because I live on the marsh. And that's one of the definite pleasures. I don't like my clouds to be too busy. And as I mentioned before, with the liquid, the white tends to blend in too much, so I kind of have to let this dry. And I'll come back and highlight these areas, but it really depends on how busy you want your sky to be. And I'm sort of happy with this beginning. So for now, I'm going to say goodbye and try to hold this so that the glare doesn't diminish my work. There's always that tendency to just keep dabbing, but for now I'm going to. Now what I have done is to go over those clouds which I had in session 1, and I'm using a fairly large white bristle brush, and I'm putting white paint on in a specific manner, and then I will go back with a softer brush and with a darker color to create the shadows from the clouds. And what I've also done is add a slight touch of yellow to indicate that these clouds are picking up light from the sun. Now, when I've done these clouds, while I still have my masking tape on, I'm going to put a background color for my sand. My water is principally going to be going right here where this masking tape is, and I'm not going to go all the way up to the tape, but this will keep me from having to do that at a later point. So now on for the clouds. Now I'm not using any medium to speak of, and this is going to be making some noise, but just to show you. Now what you don't want to do is to maintain the same pressure and the same stroke. Got some fuzz on my brush as you go along. And you don't want to come too far down because you need that contrast from the blue that we're going to put below. And I don't want to get too complicated with these clouds. Now, the clouds over here are going to have sea oats coming up into them, so they definitely do not need to be very busy. And you will realize after you have looked at several YouTube videos on how to make clouds that each artist has his or her own way of achieving clouds. As I said in the other video, some people begin with the white of the clouds and then fill in the shadows. Some start with the shadows and move up, but it really doesn't matter as long as you achieve what it is you like. Now, knowing that I'm going to have sea oats coming up in here, I want to consider how much contrast I want. So you need to always be thinking about where you're going next with your painting. And so now I'm dropping in some shadow shapes. And do keep in mind, just like the foliage on the tree, you want shapes of color. And I'm using a mixture of cobalt blue and white and a little bit of cadmium red to gray this down somewhat. But you can see that as I work on the canvas, it changes shape and changes tone and value, actually. I'm just adding the color in the shadow right now. I'm not trying to fix the white of the clouds. One thing I don't want to do is have my clouds leaning too much one way or the other, because that might suggest that the wind is blowing harder in one direction or the other. In the case of these sea oats, I want them to be bending toward the center of the painting, so I don't want to imply that the wind is blowing these clouds in a different direction. So it's really best that they sort of stand upright. Highlighting is a little bit different than that. I'm going to put just the slightest touch of alizarin crimson. Just because I like alizarin crimson. It gives me a slightly different shadow color to work with. And of course, as you continue to work it in, it will be less visible. Sometimes that's advisable, sometimes not, because I have mentioned how you really don't want to over blend your colors. And in this case, that looks like just enough. I'll change that so it doesn't look too much like a hole. And while I have this color on my brush, this little bit of alizarin, I can go through and add a little bit of that to my shadow colors to add interest. Before I took my tape off, I have done a background color with burnt sienna. And I've done this just because when I get ready to do my sand and my highlights in my sand, I want to have a nice rich background on which to do that. And this area right here is going to blend into the water. This is where the water has conceivably been and has left the ground, the sand, wet. And I'll be doing more work on that. But I have also put in the beginnings of my ocean. Now, if you've ever spent any time looking at the ocean, um, you know that unless it's a real stormy kind of ocean or a lot of wind, in our part of the country, we don't have extremely high waves. So there's not a lot of activity, and this is just the beginning. But what we'll be doing is give the illusion that there is some movement going on. And I'll be doing that with rather parallel lines. Some of these are kind of wavy right now, but they shouldn't be in the long run. And then we're going to give the illusion of breaking waves, but that'll come in a few minutes. But I'm using cobalt blue as my base, which is what I use for the clouds. And I'm also using a touch of red and a touch of orange. And what we want to do here is have several different shades of blue, if you will, to give that feeling of movement. And as the water moves, it picks up the light slightly different. So we want to give that impression. And then we'll put in some waves and then bring the waves on into the shore. And I've also, if you've noticed here, I've also drawn some lines to indicate where my sand dunes are going to be. Now these sand dunes are going to be in the distance, so they're going to be smaller. The sea oats that come out of them are going to be much smaller to indicate distance. This side will be much closer, and also the sea oats will be longer, and they'll be going up into this area. Now, my canvas is 24 or 12 by 24, which means it's shaped differently than what most of you are going to be using, which is 16 by 20, or whatever you choose. But this is the canvas that I had. So I have to give a little more attention to the spatial organization of my sand dunes because I do want to stretch them out. So I'm going to be working on the water first. I have, once I removed the tape, I have a good sense of where my horizon line is going to be. And I would suggest, if you want to save some time, because your canvas is probably dry by the time you start to work on your water, you can actually put another piece of masking tape at the top so that you don't have to deal with what I have, which is trying to maintain a straight line. But I'm not too worried about that at this point. So let's work on some water. Now, basically what I've already done is that I've used some of my medium. And so it's a fairly thin line, which for this water is fine because it actually is going to give me that sort of translucence that I'll be looking for as I'm blending my colors together. And in this case, I don't want to overblend. I want to make sure that I have some distinction between my colors. Now this is going to be a little too, and I'm going to cross in front of this camera so I can work from a comfortable distance and direction. Now you notice that's actually a little bit too dark, but what I'm doing is going back to pick some of that up. This is a little bit tedious, but not too much. And I don't mind that my liquid is creating some brush strokes. Now here's a little thing I'm doing with just a bare touch of the tip of my brush. I don't quite have enough white on it, but I want to suggest some distant wave movement. This is so faint, I doubt you can see this in the video, but I'm barely touching. And the same holds true for these kinds of strokes as when doing your foliage in the trees, shapes of the shadows and the highlights, and in your clouds. You want to go with an irregular pattern. You don't want to do the same thing over and over, so that some of these can be a little whiter. You don't want to break down the illusion here by developing too many patterns. And I'm actually going to call this a session because I don't want to have too much information. But before I do, let me clean up these edges a little bit. Blend them in. Now you may realize, if you can tell the distinction in this color, that maybe this is going to be the color we're going to use for our wet sand. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. Please put your questions and comments down below, and feel free to write me if you don't understand something I'm doing or saying. I know that seeing these finer details on video may not be easy, but I will be back.